I got to introduce our guests. So here we have not one, but two representatives from the UC system. We are so lucky. First, we have Cesar Gonzalez. He is an admissions representative at UC Riverside. Did you hear that, Ms. Wong? She's a proud alum, one of our wonderful colleagues here at SI. And for last year, he has worked with the undergraduate admissions to recruit, present, and evaluate students coming into UCR. Previously, Cesar worked as a school counselor at Da Vinci Design High School, assisting students applying to colleges and universities all over California. As a result of these roles, he's seen the admissions process from both sides as an evaluator and as an advisor as well. So welcome, Cesar. And then also we have Brian Ju, who is a senior director for outreach and communications at UC Irvine. Go Anteaters. Brian has been at UCI for over 20 years and he looks 20 years old. Oh my God, as a staff member. Don't worry, Cesar, you look good too, but 20 years as an additional for 4 years. So yes, he's a proud alum at UCI as well. The reason Brian has stayed so long is because UC Irvine is a campus that has the best of both worlds. It's a large research university, yet still operates in a way that feels like a small school that's situated in a beautiful location where you have access to everything in Southern California, like great beaches, diverse community, and of course, you know it, Disneyland. Welcome, gentlemen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Vaccaro. Appreciate the enthusiastic introductions. I appreciate it. I'm sure Brian does as well. So thank you all for being here today. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you'll kind of have a better gist of what to expect, when composing your personal insight questions when you're applying to, the UC system. Before we get into any of the meat of the presentation and, in regards to the PIQs, I just want to go over really briefly all of the schools that are a part of the UC system, right? So we have 9 different schools for students to choose from, for students to apply to, all with their own neat advantages, right? You can go as far north as UC Davis, right? Which I want to say is kind of close to where you all are situated, UC Berkeley. And you could go as far south as UC San Diego, Irvine, which Brian represents, and Riverside, which I represent. Keep in mind that UC, it is one of the largest university systems in the world that offers undergraduate and graduate programs. We are kind of a big name when it comes to schools, and I like to kind of toot our own horn and say that we're a prestigious school or university system, I should say. Just before we get into anything else, let's get to the PIQs. Let's go over some dates, right? Some things to keep in mind, especially if you are a current junior student, right? So the UC application itself, it does open up in August. So August 1st, mark that down, is when our application opens, right? So you will have August, September, October, and November to file a UC application. And let's be a little bit more careful. So the application opens up August 1st. However, you can't click submit on the application until October 1st. So the month of October and the month of November is when you actually go in and submit. Now, when it allows to submit that application, October 1st, as of this coming year, so for you all juniors, you're being given an extra month to submit that. Previously, it was November 1st, the submission date, November 1st to the 30th. So now we're moving up a month. So now you have a little bit more time to click that submit button. But like I said, August 1st, it does open up. February through March is usually when schools start sending out admissions decisions, right? So whether students were accepted, waitlisted, or denied, that's a date to look out. So those seniors, I'm not sure that there are any seniors in this presentation currently, but you'll start to hear out fairly soon, right? If you haven't already. May 1st is that date for the deadline for SIR, so that statement of intent to register, where you do have to indicate which school you're ultimately going to attend, right? So another key important date. And if you did end up on the wait list, in about May through June is usually when we notify students of, wait lists for the schools that they apply to. Before you start, right? And this is kind of more so to tailor towards the application itself. I'm happy, that you all are here. You're getting some of this exposure a little bit early on, right? And kind of knowing what you need to do and what things you should, get down to business now. Consider your majors, the majors and campuses that you're wanting to apply for, right? Do a little bit of research on the back end and see what school is a right fit for you. What schools do you think might be a right fit for you, right? Not every school is going to have the major or the program that you want or that you're trying to pursue. So it's important to kind of know, well, UC Riverside has entomology, however, X, Y, and Z doesn't, right? So, have some of that research on the back end before you start your application so that you're kind of, when you start your apps, you know exactly what you're looking, what schools you're going to apply to. Essentially, unofficial transcripts, you're going to need unofficial transcripts when you're working on an application. Writing your responses, right? Your personal insight questions. So that's what we're here for, right? So hopefully, like I said, by the end of this, you're going to have a little bit of more kind of substance to that. But your PIQs, you don't have to wait until August to start composing them, right? You all can start writing them now. I always think of when I was in high school, we wrote our PIQs early on, and through this presentation, you'll have a little bit easier time writing those PIQs. And then lastly, curating a document to outline all of your activities and awards or volunteer experiences, anything that you might list on the application. Have a place where you can go to and see, well, I've done X, Y, and Z in 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So kind of just some general helpful tips before getting started.
All right, I'll jump in here at this point. So when you submit your application, how do we actually review all of it in context, basically? And so just kind of as a quick FYI, when you apply to each of the UC campuses, we review all of the applications independently. So whether you apply to UC Riverside and UC Irvine, it's not like I'm going to call Caesar and say, hey, I know so-and-so applied. Let's talk about this application. We each review our applications all independently of each of the campuses because each of our campuses have different criteria. There's different majors, there's different requirements that we're looking for each of our applicants. But the way that all of our campuses review applications is through something called comprehensive review. And so these are the areas where we're obviously looking at things like academic achievement. Of course, by now you've heard that the UCs are not requiring any standardized tests, so we don't require the ACT or SAT. We don't use it in any of our admissions or selection review. But we're also looking in the application, the personal and school context. We're looking to see if you have any special talents, if you encounter any life challenges, or do you have any special circumstances? And all of that can be mixed into any part of the application. So it's not necessarily just the PIQs, but we can look at it from the extracurricular activities. We can look at it from the awards and achievements. We can look at it from your involvements. So what we're trying to do is get an entire picture and profile of you together. And so there's never really a formula for how you get into a specific UC campuses with this combination. So it's not like it's a combination of, okay, if I have this many good grades and if I have this score and I do this many activities and I say these things on the PIQ, that's going to get you in. The idea is that we all put it together so we get an idea of who you are as a person in light of your context, in light of your circumstances. And so how we do that is that in selection, we're putting it all together in a kind of like a puzzle piece here. And we're putting almost like a pie together where we're factoring all of these different things. So if you can see here, we're looking at the PIQs here, we're looking at the contextual factors, and we're looking at the academic factors, and we look at your extracurriculars, not to mention what the rest of the pool looks like. And that all gets put together in terms of how you're kind of admitted to a UC campus. So it's never one individual part. So it's never going to be about, okay, if I had that one extra GPA point, is that going to get me in? Or if I had done that one extra hour of activity, or if I had said this one extra thing on the PIQ. When we put it all together, it's really a whole. And so the idea is that really the more you talk about yourself, the more you give us information about these areas, about these criteria that we're looking for, the more it's to your advantage. And so really the PIQ is something about making it your own. And so this is your opportunity in a lot of ways to talk about yourself and to tell us who you are. So when we're talking about, how are you selected? How does that all work together? The idea is that we're looking for different measures of success. And so obviously there's always what I call the easy things to understand, like the quantifiable things, right? We see your GPA, we see the number of courses you've taken, we've seen maybe AP classes, we see special projects you've done, we've seen your extracurricular activities, we've seen the awards, any hours and stuff like that. That's all quantifiable. That's all kind of the resume stuff I like to see. But the idea is that aside from that, we don't know who you are as a person. And so when we're looking at those things, we want to see it in light of the non-academic factors and accomplishments, or the context basically of what's happening. And so this is going to be your education or family environment. What are the circumstances between what's happening? What are the available opportunities or resources in your school as well as your hometown, right? What are things you're able to get involved in? There's always a difference between being in a big city versus a rural area. Getting a second job or getting an outside job at a Starbucks, it could mean driving 20 miles if you're in a rural area versus you could just get a job in McDonald's down the street or something. What are any challenges or life situations you have faced, whether it's personally, whether it's environmental or contextual? All of those things kind of put together in light. And the easiest way to express those things are obviously in the personal insight questions. And so that's why we have that section for you. And that's why it's so important, is because we want to make sure that it's kind of completing your application. When I say that the application is similar to, like, if I looked at the success areas and said, okay, all the academic stuff is kind of like your bones, and it's like the skeleton of you. All the muscle and body and face and skin and all that stuff that makes who you are, personality, that's in the context stuff. And that's what you get to fill in. And so I always like to say, you have the power, you have the ability to kind of set your own narrative and be able to tell us about yourself. And that's why it makes it very individual. And that's why there's no formula, is because this is your opportunity to tell us who you are as a person on here.
All right. So as a starting point, personal insight questions. So the basics. So, select questions that are most relevant to your experiences, that best reflect your individual circumstances per se. You're going to see the questions in a few slides down the line. So, don't think we're not going to show them. We're definitely going to show what those questions are. But kind of just as a starting point, as a freshman student, as a freshman applicant, you do choose to write about 4 out of 8 total questions, right? So you only have to answer 4 of them. I know a lot of the times I see a lot of students that say, oh, I have to answer, those 8 essays for the use. They say essays, right? Which they are not, right? And I think we'll talk about it a little bit down. So it's only 4 of 8 responses, personal insight question responses, that you have to answer. Keep in mind that, you are limited in the word count. So there's a 350 word limit for each 4 of these responses, right? So in those 350 words, you do have to make sure that you're answering the question accurately and to the best of your ability, right? All questions have equal value, so there is no advantage or disadvantage to choosing certain questions over others. I think one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of students will email me and ask me specifically like that question, is it better if I answer this question as opposed to this question, right? To this PIQ, and that's absolutely not the case, right? So all questions have equal value, and it's just important to answer the ones that you can answer the best of your ability. Again, the PIQs, they should be used to share your accomplishments, your experiences, talents, decision making, problem solving, and any contextual information. Back to that point that I said earlier, right? This is not an essay, and I think that's one of the things that we try to get across, right? You aren't writing an English paper, right? We're not checking necessarily for grammar. You don't have to write in a narrative. You don't have to write as if you're writing a book, right? Answer the questions. If there's one thing I like to get across to students, is make sure that you're answering what the question is asking. Use I statements. Another big one there. I did this. I chose to do this. I learned about, make it about yourself, right? This is kind of like your opportunity to boast, right? Because this is ultimately your application, and we want to hear about you. So what exactly is the purpose of the PIQs, right? So one, it completes the application, right? So this is to emphasize how PIQs either stand well on their own by providing new information that can't be found elsewhere in the application, right? Because at this point, like we've seen your grades, you've reported your grades to us. We've seen what we need to see on that academic aspect. And now we want to, like Brian mentioned earlier, see what makes you, right? So they do act, or they lend themselves well to like supporting what may be said in other parts of your application, right? So maybe in other parts of your extracurricular activities or special programs or academics, right? Or things of that nature. So again, what is the purpose of the PIQ? So self-advocacy, right? So Brian's going to go into a little bit more detail on some of these bubbles, but self-advocacy. So telling us, or showing us, I should say, how you stand out, right? Not necessarily in terms of how you're better than everyone else, right? But how you're showing us that I'm boasting about myself here. And then context, right? So context within the application itself, all the things that you've already written, like I've kind of already previously stated, it adds context to your application, and giving us just that little bit more. And then it sets students apart, right? These PIQs, it really, it's us getting to know you more than just, like I keep saying, like more than just your grades.
Okay, so let's go a little more further into what we're kind of looking about. When we talk about when we talk about self-advocacy, what's kind of the idea? And I know generationally and personally, sometimes it might be hard to talk about yourself, and I totally get that. I'm not a person that likes to brag about myself. I'm very humble. I try to stay out of the spotlight in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, you have to treat the PIQs like a newspaper headline. You have to advocate for yourself. You have to kind of find your own voice and focus of what makes you unique. And that's the way to come across in that way. Since the UC's here, we don't interview you. We don't have letters of recommendation. We don't take any of that type of stuff. This is really the opportunity for you to kind of talk about yourself and tell us, basically what makes you kind of stand out and what makes you, a really strong applicant in that way. The way I kind of look at it is that this is our interview. So even though we don't do formal interviews because we get way too many applications, obviously the UCs are very popular where we get 100,000 applications every single year. We can't interview every single student. So I always like to say, treat the PIQs like an interview. Treat it as if me or Caesar was sitting across from you on a Zoom or in person, and we asked you one of the PIQs. How would you answer that back? You're not going to start off with like a formal essay. You're not going to quote and say, well, Abraham Lincoln once said, you don't talk to anyone like that in an interview. So the idea is to come across and just say, jump into it yourself. Talk about yourself like that interview. Treat it like you're talking to us in person, and use that type of language and use that tone of voice with it. We don't care about what Abraham Lincoln said. He's dead and he's not you. We want to know what you say. So that's the idea when we talk about self-advocacy, is that you only have 350 words. So don't waste your time talking about someone else's words. We want to hear your own words on this topic. The other thing to kind of go into is, how do you kind of are set apart from this? What makes you obviously you, and what makes you unique? This is your chance, again, to talk about your story. It's a chance to add depth to something that is already important to you. So it's not necessarily, we'll talk about common mistakes and things, but it's not necessarily highlighting things that we already know outside in the application. We want to know a little more in depth of what's happening. And so, yes, everyone can be, a standout athlete or a really wonderful performer, right? But we don't know what are the steps that it took to get to those places. So it's not necessarily answering the question of the outcomes of everything, but talk about the process. How did you personally get there? Because everyone's process is a little different. So it's not about, okay, yes, I was the star athlete on this team or whatever, and we got all these awards. It's gonna be about, okay, I spent the summer 40 hours a week training with so-and-so, or I spent this many years in a ballet theater company and we did this many performances and that stuff. That's what makes you stand out. So when we talk about the PIQs, we're asking you to go into the process of everything. Don't talk about the outcomes. We can already see the outcomes. We see it from the extracurricular activities. We see it from the grades. We see it from your test scores and all that stuff. We see your AP test. We see the outcome of the work, but it's how you got to that point, how you're thinking about it. When you talk about your interest in a specific major, don't say, I'm very interested in being an environmental major, but talk about how you arrived at that point. Maybe you wanted to get involved with beach cleanups. Maybe you started recycling programs. You noticed a problem and you did that. So again, it's really describing the process of how you got to these kind of conclusions, or the process of how you got to the outcome. That's when it's going to make you you. Again, everyone can maybe talk about similar outcomes and awards and all these things, but it's really going to be the process that got you there, because that's going to be unique to you. Not everyone's going to have the same process of how you arrived to that conclusion. So that's what you want to be able to kind of advocate and explain to us through these PIQs here. So finally, here it is, the PIQs. I know it's a little blurry, it's a little small to kind of read in. This is kind of the page that when you look into the application, this is how you're going to fill it out. And so when Caesar was talking about, I'm going to answer 4 out of the 8 questions, this is where you can do that. Now, you can always email the questions to yourself. My recommendation is to email it to you and compose them outside of the application, because you don't want to be doing it right when you're live on the application. You want to definitely take your time to think about it. So my recommendation, copy these questions outside into like a word processor, a document outside that you can just cut and paste. And then when you're ready to submit the application, cut and paste them back in. But type them outside, that way you'll have a chance to work on them. You can review it, you can think about it. You don't have to stay online for it all. When you look at the questions, though, again, these are all very open-ended questions. So when we look at the 8 questions that we're asking, right? Describe an example of your leadership experience in which you have positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to groups over time, right? Every person has a creative side. It can be expressed in many different ways. Describe how you express your creative side. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? How have you developed or demonstrated that talent over time? As you can kind of see here, the question sometimes there's multifaceted, there's multi-answers to it. It's not just about listing what you've done, but there's going to be the second question usually of, how have you developed or how have you demonstrated it out over time? So make sure that when you look at these questions, you're actually reading the entire question and seeing, okay, what are we really trying to get at? It's not necessarily the first question that we're asking, but it's going to be the second part of it, right? Describe how you have furthered this interest inside or outside of the classroom with an academic subject that inspires you, right? So don't just talk about, again, you're interested in environmental science, but the idea is the PIQ is to answer how you have furthered that interest into those things. I usually like to say the last question, number 8, beyond what's already been shared, that's really kind of our really open-ended one, where I'd say, like, this is kind of the really, if there's something you really want to tell us, something that you're really proud of, something that you have, something that you want us to know and you want to use that as a PIQ answer, this is kind of that open-ended response, right? What makes you a strong candidate for the admission to the University of California? That's really the purpose of number 8. So again, just to reiterate, there's no formula for which ones you pick. You're just going to pick 4 of them. And usually I would like to pick the 4 that relate to the strongest things that you have to share to us. So when you kind of look back at your high school career, the top 4 or 5 things that you want an admissions person officer to know, that's how you want to kind of relate the PIQs. Because again, they're so open-ended, they're so general that you can pretty much fit most responses into any of these questions in that way. We're not necessarily looking to see how much you are answering the question, but more of, okay, what new information or what information are we getting from you from these PIQs right here?
All right. So I think that for these next 2 slides are probably going to be some of the most beneficial slides in the presentation. At least I would think so, right? So some of the things, common mistakes that we try to have students avoid within their personal, when responding to their personal insight questions. So Brian kind of mentioned this one a little bit earlier. So the use of quotes and and thoughts of other people. So don't open with the quote. I know I remember writing papers in high school where the first thing that I did was write a quote, right? And it was an essay. And like I said, this isn't an essay, so we don't have to hear a quote. We want to hear what you think. I liked what Brian said, and it made me laugh earlier. No one cares what he said because he's dead, and we want to hear about you. That was really funny, but it's true. It's true. This is your time to shine, right? So tell us your thoughts. Definitely don't waste 350 words with words from someone else. Discuss in detail the tragic loss of your goldfish at the age of 4 and how that taught you to deal with grief. I think we've probably all lost a pet in the as a children, but it's important to think of the time frame of things, right? We want to see who you are in the here and the now, right? We want to know what's going on through your brain and what are your thoughts now, right? Not something that happened when you were 4 years old, right? Definitely don't manufacture hardship. Don't think that you need to create or write a story about hardship because you think like I this is not good enough, or I need more, so I'm gonna make something up, right? We definitely don't do that. Repeating the same situation when we already know about it. I think from previous experience, like reading students PIQs, especially when I was a counselor, I would see that students would use the same situation, repeatedly, maybe 2 or even 3 times for different PIQ responses. Try to avoid that. Avoid the repetition because once you said it once, there's really no point to say it again. I know sometimes it's like, well, it makes sense because it's connecting to this, this PIQ connects to that experience again, but try to tell us something new, right? Try to tell us something that we haven't yet heard, okay? And then don't create a continuation of the first PIQ, right? So if you write about something in the first PIQ, make sure the next one's different. It's not a continuation of that same story. Talk about parents, grandparents, siblings, significant others for 300 words. I know for a lot of us, family is a big, it's a big deal. Our friends are a big deal for us, right? And we care about them. But going back to it, keep in mind that although their stories might be inspiring, we want to hear about you. We want to hear about your story. So don't waste your word count telling us something about someone else's story. So, remember your voice, your story.
The next one is really, don't try to be funny or use crude humor. Remember, you are writing to complete strangers who cannot react to you. And so the way that you use this, it kind of tells you a little bit about yourself. Don't try to be funny. I think about in the past, one of the weirdest ones I ever read was basically a student compared himself to a Chipotle burrito and basically said, I'm a Chipotle burrito and here's all my parts and stuff like that. I was the chicken, something was the rice and beans, and something about the tortilla and the sour cream and salsa. And it didn't have anything to do with the application. It was like, I knew you were trying to be funny. I knew you were trying to be creative to stand out, but it really just didn't help. Another one was a student who said, I'm an alien. And they thought to send like, I'm an alien who's trapped in a 17-year-old body from Northern California. And I'm observing your culture and people by embodying, what it means to be a teenager. It's like, okay, hilarious. But again, just not necessary for a PIQ. The idea is that if you are a creative person, if you are someone who likes to stand out in your writing, your normal writing will connote that. It'll communicate that to us. We will be able to understand and see your creativity just in the way you respond. So you don't have to manufacture these kind of really funny or witty responses. Not to mention, you don't need to curse at anyone or use inappropriate language in that. I've heard very many graphic novels that almost like a romance novel that I'd rather not see with my own eyes. If you can't show your parents this, I probably wouldn't show this to anyone else. So just, again, you don't need to try to be funny in order to stand out. Like, we are already going to be reading the application. I know the first thing that English teachers tell you is that, okay, you got to draw the reader in. You got to, put something funny. You got to do something to keep our attention. Here's a really big, reality. Caesar and I, this is our job. Our job is to read your application. So you already have our attention. This is part of the process of how we're going to review you to see if you're going to be selected. So you don't have to worry about us being bored and like, okay, we're not interested, we're going to pass it on. We are going to read your application. We read it multiple times. It's not just one reader. So definitely know that you don't have to use humor or crude jokes in order to get our attention. We will absolutely read every part of your application. And so that's why just get to the point, answer the questions. Number 6, don't try to impress us by seeing how well your SAT vocabulary is, or trying to be, pretending you're like an SAT like teacher. We don't need to see big words. Half the time, if I don't understand the word, how am I expecting you to actually understand the right context either? And so again, the idea is write in your own voice and language. Just take the time to pretend, okay, we were sitting across from you. We were on Zoom together and we're talking live. Would you really use SAT words back to me in that way? Now, okay, some of you, the 1% of you might totally be doing it, and I might just be nodding my head and totally not understand what you're saying. But for the majority of it, it's got to be people like us who just talk in your everyday language. If you need to explain something, that's all you have to do. You don't have to impress us with that. There's admissions reps, there's counselors, there's faculty, there's other staff. They're all reading PIQ. So there's a lot of different people that are reading it. Don't make us question who the writer is. The other thing to do is, that kind of gives us a sense like, okay, is someone else writing your PIQ? Especially if you're talking in a voice and language in a way that sounds older than who you are. If you're answering your description of your extracurricular activities and you're just saying some really kind of regular language, and all of a sudden you switch tones into this really, huge, Shakespearean PIQ, I'm going to even question, okay, what did you actually write these, or did you have that much time to kind of think of it? So we can actually tell in the context of even the writing from your the way you describe your extracurricular activities and awards to the PIQs, what's going on. And so that's just something for you to think about, is to remember that you want to have kind of that consistent voice throughout the PIQs. So number 7 here, blank. And this is actually one I see a lot. I've actually seen the most of probably this past year, is where students just leave it blank, or they write one sentence and say, here's my answer, here you go. And that's really it. And that's just to me, it's such a wasted opportunity, because every part of the application is designed for you to tell us something about yourself. And so the way we kind of look at it is that everything in your application is value added. So the more information you give us, the more we have evidence to say, oh yeah, you can be a successful student at UC. And so the idea is to not miss that opportunity. Actually put down a PIQ. I've seen so many times where it's literally just one sentence and everyone just assumes, okay, my grades or my other things are going to get me in. And that's not the case. And so the worst thing you can do is just leave it blank. I really can't emphasize how much that these PIQs really give context. And there's other times where it completely helps the student, because I see that maybe the student missed out an area to talk about, like maybe they didn't mention they were on ASB or part of a sports teams, but all of a sudden in the PIQs they mentioned, okay, and from 9th to 12th grade I was captain of the varsity basketball team, and I was student government, vice president or something like that. Well, because the application is holistic and it's comprehensive, we can actually pull in information from that PIQ to say, oh, you were in these activities. We can actually apply that. So even if you left something else, blank somewhere else, but we learned that, oh, you were actually involved in some activities earlier on, that will totally benefit you. And we've done that where we're able to say, okay, the PIQ actually helped the student because they introduced information that we didn't know anywhere else in the application, and they took advantage of that. So not to say that you should save everything for the PIQ, but again, every part of the application is designed to give you an opportunity to share about yourself. So take advantage of that opportunity. Get right to using this section to introduce some new information that we didn't know about you before. The worst thing you can do is leave it blank. And finally, the last one that I have about just common mistakes as we kind of slowly wrap up, and we'll have some time for questions, is number 8 is talk about how you always wanted to go to UC Berkeley to become a Mighty Bear. Like, I totally get it. My dad went to Berkeley. So, that's one of the reasons why I had to apply to Berkeley. But the idea is that if you're applying to multiple campuses, everyone's going to see that. So when I read it, or Caesar reads it and say, oh, all you want to do is become a Berkeley or Cal Bear, and none of, you're applying to us, kind of makes me kind of second guess, what are you, why are you even, applying to us? And do you really want to come here if we let you, not to say that we won't let you in because, you say you really want to be a bear or something like that. But remember that it's one application and it's one set of PIQs. So write in a way that's not specific to a specific campus. You're not going to be able to separate that out. So if you really want to tell that specific campus something, you're going to have to do it in a different manner because you're not going to be able to do it through the application. The application is one application. You're applying to the University of California. And so just remember that each of the campuses you check off gets a copy of that same exact application, the exact same PIQ. So if you said Cal Berkeley and you applied to Riverside and Irvine, both Caesar and I are reading that and saying, did you really understand the application? So again, we independently evaluate your application, but we all see the same PIQs. And so just remember that as you're writing these things, you're not writing to one campus, you're not writing to your dream school. Like, keep your dream school separate. I really want to hope that, yes, it's always good to have goals and have a really great dream school, but I think there's a lot of really, really good universities that are good fits, and they could become dream campuses because of what they offer. And so don't put all your eggs in one basket and say, okay, this has got to be my dream school, and I'm only going to apply to that one school like that and put everything in there. So when you're applying to multiple schools, a lot of them could be really good fits. And if you do get admitted to one of them, I highly encourage you to do your research, check it out, kind of see what they have to offer, because you might find out that it's actually a better fit for you than what you originally thought of that. So with that being said, that was our kind of quick summary in terms of common mistakes. I know we're going to want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, so I'll go ahead and let Caesar kind of wrap us up here.
Definitely, and this I think is one of our last slides, but just the things to leave you all with. Top things to remember when writing your PIQ. So, talk about yourself. I think we've kind of said that, over and over again within this presentation. We want to hear about you, not about anyone else. The additional comments is not PIQ number 5. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a PIQ written in the additional comments. So that space is reserved for information that doesn't fit anywhere else on the application, right? So some examples of that can be an unusual personal or family circumstance, right? Anything that perhaps it wasn't, for whatever reason, it wasn't able to be mentioned anywhere else. You would use the additional comments tab to do that. We don't want to see a 5th PIQ response in that section. We won't be looking at that, okay? Remember to answer the question. Brian mentioned it earlier, right? Some of these are multifaceted, and they ask oftentimes, 2 questions, right? Rarely is just the answer that first part of it. Answer all parts of the question, right? One of the things I always tell students is, read the PIQ as until you understand what it's asking. Write it and then read the PIQ again, just to make sure that you hit on every point. Write in a way that's easy to understand. Imagine that you are talking to an admissions counselor in person. So how would you respond? I think Brian, kind of talked about this earlier, right? Talk to us as the way that you would if we were talking in person, right? And then use your own words. Don't copy or plagiarize. We'll check for that, right? And like Brian already touched upon a little bit earlier as well, like we're able to tell because of the way that you may have answered responses in the activities and awards, right? It's going to be a difference from, when you answer on the PIQs. We can tell, the differences in writing. And I believe there's one last slide, Brian. It's just a, very, kind of like a help desk. I see those animations moving. I didn't see those before. So you're at liberty to contact us at our phone number, email as well, and then commonly asked questions and answers. So I encourage you all. Our websites are extremely helpful. There are actually a lot of resources for PIQs and general admissions questions on our website. So I know you all are tech savvy. You can Google admissions at University of California, and you'll be able to find a resource or two for you all to utilize when you are starting to write these PIQs or when you're all actually applying for our universities. But with that being said, I do believe that is the last slide, and we'll make time for any questions that you all might have. We just threw a lot of information at you all, so please do feel free to use that Q&A feature to ask any lingering questions, and hopefully Brian or myself can assist with those questions.
Awesome, gentlemen. Fantastic. And we actually have some preset questions for you, and I know you guys are ready for it. So first, thank you for reminding everyone, this is a separate application. A lot of times seniors will go, wait, It's not on Common App. Where's my UC? So it is a separate application that the UCs all use. But on that UC application, you guys do ask them to describe all their activities. So can they talk more on the PIQs about that activity? And how do you view the description of the activities versus the PIQs in the admissions process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really easy. So absolutely, yes, you can use the activities and expound upon that in the PIQ. So like I said before, the activities section is really the outcome. So you could say, okay, I was involved in a sport, or I was involved in theater, or I was involved in volunteer, but we don't understand the process of how you got to that point. So the idea is that the PIQ is used to expand upon the process that you got there. Maybe you were involved for 4 years, and by your senior year, you were the president of the club or organization. How did you get to that point? Or if you were a leader and you were involved in that organization, what were the challenges you faced? How did you grow as a leader? What were some experiences you got from those types of things? So the idea is that when you're describing the activity itself, tell us what that exactly is, because we come from so many different backgrounds. We don't know every single sport, activity, involvement, club, or organization. And it gets worse when it's at high school because there's so many abbreviations. So your CSF could mean something else versus AP. I always like to joke, AP in high school is great because it's an advanced placement. AP when you get to college is academic probation, and you don't want to be on AP when you're in college. So very, very different in terms of abbreviation. So use the explanation about the activities section to talk about what that is. If it's an abbreviation of an organization, tell us what it is. If it's an award, tell us, how many people are considered for this award. Is this a national award, a local award, a city award? So describe the actual item that it is in the activities or extracurriculars or the awards. Tell us what's going on. But then the PIQ is to answer, what is your involvement in that? What is your place in that area? One of the easiest ones I've seen is that a student said, okay, I was involved in the basketball team. In the description, they actually said, basketball is a game that's 5-on-5 with 5 players on one team, 5 players on a team, and there's one basket and you try to get it into a hoop. That's what they used it. And that's totally fine. That explained to me if someone didn't know what basketball was, you understood basketball. Then the PIQ is used to talk about, okay, if I was captain of the basketball team, how did I get to that spot? Are you talking about the number of NBA, J leagues you've been in? Are you talking about how many hours of practice did you as a captain organize your own summer workouts? Did you have adversity? Maybe you didn't have enough players, or you were always up against better competition, and how did you come together as a league? So that's the stuff where you're going to insert yourself in the narrative about what you are in basketball. That's what the PIQ is supposed to be. So, is there anything else to add to that?
I think you answered it very solidly, Brian.
As always, both of you will do that. And now my next question is that UCs are test free. So no SAT, ACT, you can't even see it. But what if I have a score I want to brag about and I write about in my PIQ? Can they? Should they? What should they do?
Don't do it. just don't include it. We're not going to take it into consideration. We're not going to look at it. We're not going to give you brownie points for it. So don't include it. We're not going to be looking at SAT or ACT scores for admissions purposes. So some students sometimes report tests that they may have been able to take for whatever reason. I don't know how. I know for the last 2 years it's been on a lockdown, but some students, I've seen students report test scores, they're self-reported test scores, but they're not going to be taken into consideration when it comes to admissions. So don't give it to us.
And then the other question that I have, I know you guys, it's your job and you're going to read it, but there's always that question: how do you have time to read 100,000 applications with on top of 20 activities, with on top of 4 PIQs? How do you guys do it?
We just get it done, and I'm sorry to say. So each campus, like I said, reviews independently, and all of our campuses hire a lot of readers to read applications, so we have a lot to distribute. And again, like I said, this is our job, and so we read during our holiday breaks, most often during Christmas and New Year's. I've actually been reading applications like that. So during that filing period, once you get your application into us, it allows us to basically start reading once everything kind of gets processed. So we try to get to it as fast as we can, and we have a procedure. There's trainings. We have to go through a lot of kind of norming files and practices in order to actually understand the system of how we're reading. So when I read, and I will tell you this right now, I'm always, in my mind, data mining. And so I'm always keeping a track of, okay, is this information that I'm reading going to add to your application? Is it something new that I'm learning? And so as I'm going down through each of the parts of the application, and it's actually designed in a really logical way, so we can kind of see things really easily on screens. Thankfully for technology, it's great because I can scroll now on my computer or laptop or iPad, versus in the past, it was actually all paper. And it was even worse. I don't even want to say when we had to actually look at handwritten stuff, because that was going to be impossible. But so thank goodness everything's typed and everything's electronic now, where I can actually just scroll. And it's in a very easy way where then I can just kind of read through and be able to see, okay, I'm looking for information. Again, we're trained to actually look for information about you. And so if you're wasting time, like we've said before, about repeating yourself or just giving us information or leaving it blank, which is super easy because obviously I just scroll past it, right? So the more information you give us, the more it'll help you for us to get a good picture of you on the application. So we definitely make the time to do it. We get it all done in the amount of time. I know it sounds like it's a lot of work, but this is what our job is, and we're trained to do it. And I think what helps is that the more you understand what we're looking for, it'll be easier to fit in. So you're not trying to guess of what we're looking for. So I think these PIQ workshops are helpful because it allows you to give from our point of view some insight of what we're looking for, so that it actually speeds up the process. Because again, if we see quotes from other people like Albert Einstein or Gandhi or something like that, it's like, great, I can really read that fast because I've seen that quote a billion times. But I'm looking for information about you. And so that's what I'm trying to look for when I zero in, when I read the application.
And then you guys did a great job what not to do. But I know there's always some statements that are made that you guys talk about, like, oh my God, did you read this? It's so amazing. So in your guys' offices, and this is not for you juniors to repeat again, remember, it's your stories, everyone's story is unique. Where were the ones that just stood out to you like, dang, they got it right?
It's hard to think of a specific one. Like it's definitely hard just because, you're going to see a lot of them. And it's hard to say like, this is one here that, we're passing around. We're saying this one's good. This one got it. But I think the ones that always stand out the most are always going to be the ones that essentially follow what we're asking students to write about, right? Kind of like this entire presentation, right? So answering that question, making sure to elaborate, what was the process, right? So in my mind, at least myself, I don't think I could pinpoint a very specific one unless I go into my files and I go looking for one. So I feel like I don't have the best answer for you all. And I apologize for that. And I apologize for the ringtone there. So Brian, is there one that you can offer up for everyone?
Yeah, I hate to say that because I don't want anyone to think, this is a standard format, that's a good one. Like Caesar was saying, the best ones are the ones where we're like, wow, that really fits the person of it completed their application. Like, I really felt like I got to know this person through the words that they were talking about. And so whatever the circumstances were like, at the end, I was like, oh, I got a better understanding of their home life or the situation, why this is what it is. Or I got a better sense of, oh, wow, they're such a great and accomplished student in this way. And it really demonstrated it and they backed it up. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. And the reason we focus on so much of not it is because it's so common to see all the common mistakes and problems. Like, I would go from this and say, because we are not the Common App, don't copy your Common App responses from other schools and just put it into a PIQ and make it fit. And that's what we've seen the most, is that so many of these PIQs just do not match the question that's happening, because you basically wrote one statement and try to make it fit for the Common App, which is asking for one thing, versus the UC application is designed for something else. And so when I say, I know it may be a little more work, but that's why we give you so much ample time, is to kind of think through it and to kind of be deliberate and intentional about it. And that's where it actually helps you. Yeah, you can absolutely copy your Common App one and just paste it in and, for the most part, it's good. But we read so many applications that we can totally recognize when that's happening. We're like, okay, student totally just copied from the Common App because it's not really answering the question and it just doesn't feel in the right context and it's not helping it. So The idea is that, again, the more personal you can make it and the more about the process that you've taken through it, that's the winners. Those are the ones that separate out from the beginning. It's because you're actually specific about you. You're not talking in generalities. You're not talking about, oh yeah, and we practiced this much time and we got the state championship. When I see like the we statements and stuff like that, again, I don't get the idea that this is you or how much you're involved in it. So I want to get back down to, okay, what was your personal involvement? What was the context of all those things that are happening? You know, maybe, you know, for some people, you know, understanding that maybe they have to get up at 4 a.m. to commute 2 hours to school and they can only do their homework at night or whatever it is. Like those types of situations are really helpful for me to understand, okay, these are the reason why, you know, maybe you're not involved in activities, or maybe the grades are different, or maybe this is why you have to spend more time in an employment because maybe not, you know, stuff at home is a struggle. So again, the more context you give us about those things, it really helps us understand who you are. So I know that's a long way to say we don't have any, you know, surefire ones to talk about.
No, but it's great because it goes back to the points, that unique story, and them saying that part and answer the question and don't add famous people's quotes. They want to hear the quotes, which is from you, the student, as well. So the last question is what resources would you recommend for our audience? Because so many of them are like, I don't know how to start, or I can't read it, or I got 20 people telling me to edit it. What are some resources that you recommend for everybody?
You know, there are a lot of resources out there from students that they simply write, you know, do stuff on YouTube where they'll post stuff about what they wrote on their PIQs. I got into X, Y, and Z, right? But, you know, start it off from what we have to offer first, right? To make sure that you're getting the information directly from us. But a lot of those, you know, videos of people that just make their own videos about PIQs and stuff, you know, actually pretty good for the most part. But that's a good starting point.
Yeah, and I know several of you guys do webinars as well too through the year. So we had a sophomore presentation, and another UC colleague of yours said, yes, sign up as inquiry list for the UCs. I can't believe there's so much. I don't know if you guys actually sleep. So let's try to have you have a little bit of sleep today, or you pile up on your coffee. But thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for helping our students just to jumpstart the UC PIQ question. Thank you for all you do. I know this is not just a job for you, but it's just making all our futures better through the UC system. Thank you so much. And thank you for our wonderful students and my great supportive colleagues. Thank you, everybody.